What's going on, YouTube? Bacon here, bringing you another video. This one going to be my draft recap for the Milky Way Pokemon Association Season 6. It's a new league I'm starting very soon, this week actually. We're starting up this league. Like I mentioned, it's Season 6 of the league. They sent out some feelers looking for new coaches. I applied and was fortunate enough to get in. The MWPA is a 4-division kind of promotion relegation type league system, sort of like the Hive. So if you do well, you'll get promoted to a higher division. If you do poorly, you'll get relegated to a lower division, or if you do kind of middling, you'll probably stay where you are. So the 4 divisions in the MWPA are Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, with Mars being the least competitive, Mercury being the most competitive. And I got stuck in Earth to start out with, which, looking at some of the other players, I think is kind of a good place for me to start out. Hopefully we can get promoted towards the end of the season here if we do well. But yeah, just coming in with a kind of quick draft recap here for you guys. Free draft format, i.e. you can pick whatever as long as it hasn't been picked yet. There's a few kind of normal rules restrictions and a few not so normal rules restrictions. Omni boosting Z moves are banned, Baton Pass is banned, normal Smogon clauses otherwise. And then they've got a couple of unbanned things that you don't necessarily normally see unbanned, like Mega Mawile is unbanned, Mega Kangaskhan is unbanned, but it's complex banned in that you can only run, or you can't run Power Up Punch or Seismic Toss if you run Mega Kangaskhan, which in my opinion makes it not so worth drafting for the most part. And then they also have a couple other things free. Hoopa Unbound is free. Mega Latios is free, but not Mega Latios. Things like that. So there's a few of the more broken things kicking around, but for the most part, it's a pretty standard league. Free draft format, something I haven't tried out to this point, so I was kind of interested to see how it would go. I had a pretty concrete idea in mind of what I wanted to do with this draft coming into it. Use some Pokemon I haven't gotten a chance to use before. As you saw kind of in the VPL Season 3, I've been kicking around with a lot of Pokemon that I've used before. Some of my old crutches. I kind of wanted to stray away from them a little bit with this draft and use some new stuff. So I think every Pokemon I drafted I have not used before in the format. So that's good. So let's get right into it with the Pokemon that I've been wanting to use for a long time, and that is Tapu Bulu. So Tapu Bulu was number 1 on my draft board, mostly because I really liked the pairing with a couple other Pokemon you'll see later in my draft. I had the 8th overall pick out of 10. It was a pick draft, so we got kind of an order and we got to pick which pick we wanted. So I was picking 4th, I believe, for where I wanted to pick. And I was like, well, I know I want Tapu Bulu, so that's probably a late first round, right? So I picked 8th. Realistically, I probably could have gotten away with picking the back wheel and been in just about the same position. But I felt like 8th was kind of safe to give me the Tapu Bulu slot. And if I didn't end up getting it, like that would guarantee there'd be some other kind of broken stuff like Mega Mawile kicking around that I could play around with. But I really want Tapu Bulu for this go around. I've really never used Tapu Bulu, not even in OU. So I'm kind of interested to see what it can do. It's got a pretty solid slate of resistances. The most notable one, as you'll see with my team coming up, being ground. Not only is it resistant to ground, but of course its ability, Grassy Surge, brings up grassy terrain, which nerfs the damage output of moves like Earthquake, Bulldoze, and Stomping Tantrum, I believe, are the only things affected by grassy terrain. So you can somewhat cover up a little bit of a ground weakness on some of your other Pokemon. It does have a couple of notable weaknesses, most notably the 4x weakness to poison, so that's something I'm going to have to cover up going forward. But a pretty decent building block, I think, in Tapu Bulu. It's got a great physically offensive stats, physical attack and physical defense are both really solid. A pretty decent special defense stat as well, especially when coupled with grassy terrain. Its HP stats nothing to write home about, but with pretty solid defenses plus the consistent recovery from like grassy terrain, Horn Leech, leftovers, Leech Seed. Pretty easy for this Pokemon to get its health back over the course of a match. You can run a variety of sets on Tapu Bulu. You can run a more kind of bulky pivot type set with Leech Seed Protect or something like that. You could run a Swords Dance set with Superpower, Mega Horn, and stuff like that. Its coverage isn't amazing. Like, it's not a good fairy is the problem, really, because it does not have access to Play Rough, so that fairy typing offensively is basically useless unless you're running like Calm Mind Tapu Bulu with Dazzling Gleam, which I won't rule out, but it probably is not high on my list of sets that I want to be running. And again, kind of a middling speed tier, but overall pretty solid starting point, I think, for the team. You can really build around Tapu Bulu because there's a lot of Pokemon out there that appreciate either the recovery or the weakening to some of those specific ground moves that Tapu Bulu can offer, or both. So I think it's kind of a good building block to start with, and then just kind of see where I went from there. Like I mentioned, I had a pretty solid plan coming into the draft of what I wanted to pair with Tapu Bulu. Nickname, by the way, we're going with Tapu Uwu because I didn't realize this is like Weeb League, man. When I heard Milky Way Pokemon Association, I thought it was like, you know, space, whatever, sure. That's a cool theme, but it turns out it's some anime. Which is fine. I have nothing against the weebs. It's just fun to make fun of them. So we've kind of ironically named our Tapu Bulu Tapu Uwu for the weeb's sake. So when in Weeb League, do as the weebs do. So we got Tapu Uwu here. Next up, we got kind of the standard partner for Tapu Bulu, which is Heatran. Pretty much everybody and their mother will tell you about the perfect defensive synergy between Tapu Bulu and Heatran. They cover each other's weaknesses perfectly. And of course, the grassy terrain will help negate damage to to Heatran over the course of the match. If he gets hit with an earthquake, you can potentially live it, depending on what is hitting him with the earthquake. But BULUTRAN is a pretty standard core in OU. Like, you've probably seen it a lot. It's often paired with like Toxic Spikes or something like that, and one of the two or both can run Protect, which is great for getting some passive recovery on these mons, as well as getting some chip damage off on your opponents if it's like Toxic Protect or Leech Seed Protect kind of shenanigans. But I thought Heatran was like kind of the perfect partner to pair with Tapu Bulu in this instance. It's another Pokemon I haven't gotten to use in the format, but I love using in OU. I fully recognize that Heatran is not as good in draft as he is in OU, just because your opponent can pretty easily tech on the appropriate ground move. Volcaronos can run HP grounds. Whatever wouldn't be carrying Earthquake normally will probably be carrying Earthquake now. Like a Mega Latios or something will absolutely, I would expect, to carry Earthquake, or a regular Latios even. So I recognize that Heatran's utility is not as good in draft, but it's definitely still something I want to try out. I love this Pokemon. It's got great natural defensive stats, more bulk than the Rotoms, so it's got the same defense and Spadef stats, but with a much higher HP stat at base 91. A workable physically offensive stat, but nobody really runs attack invested Heatran for the most part. Really the only physical attack I might even think to run on it is like Flame Charge to get the speed boost, and then you can run like 3 special moves or something for coverage to try and sweep late game or something weird like that. Again, kind of a middling speed stat, only a couple points above Tapu Bulu, but that's something that can be rectified with the rest of my draft. I just really kind of wanted the nice defensive core and utility that BULUTRAN can offer. Both of them can run a nice kind of variety of sets from physically defensive, specially defensive, or physically offensive, specially offensive in Bulu and Heatran respectively, so they can both kind of fulfill a variety of team roles. Heatran gives him our first Stealth Rocker on the team. I'm pretty sure there's nobody with more 4x resistances than Heatran has. Check me if I'm wrong on that, but that's 5 4x resistances to Bug, Grass, Fairy, Ice, and Steel. So I can't think of a Pokemon that has more 4x resistances than that. Obviously, he's got the 4x weakness to ground and a couple of other weaknesses to worry about with the fighting in water. But really great natural defensive typing and natural bulk from the Heatran. So I think I'm going to have a lot of fun using this Pokemon, even though, like I mentioned, I don't think it's going to be quite as good in Draft League as it is in like an OU type setting. We're running with Vulcan for the name on the Heatran. For those of you who don't know, Vulcan's the same as Hephaestus. It's just the Roman name because I grew up on Latin instead of Greek. That's about it. So we're calling him Vulcan instead of Hephaestus. But either I think is an acceptable name for Heatran, the god of the Forge, basically, for those of you who aren't super in tune to your Greek and Roman mythology. That's where we got the name for Heatran. Next up here is the third member of the team I wanted to pair, Latios. So I wanted Mega Latios, obviously, but who doesn't? Like, Mega Latios, I think, was the first overall pick in our league. I was pretty sure there was no way I was going to get it in the third round anyway, so I was perfectly happy to take one of the standard Latis. Actually, both Latios and Latias were still on the board at this point, and that kind of brings me to my first mistake of the draft. So I have, like I mentioned, the 8th overall pick, so I picked Bulu, Heatran pretty close together, and then I had to wait a little bit, and then round 3 came around, And Latios were still there, and so was another Pokemon I wanted, which was Suicune. I really wanted to get BULUTRAN Suicune on the same team because I thought like that was an amazing pairing. Like a Vincoon type set pairs really nicely with grassy terrain. Even just like a Calm Mind set pairs really nicely with grassy terrain. Plus, if you add like a Toxic Spiker into the mix, you become really annoying. So I really wanted BULUTRAN. But I was like, you know what? Latios is still there. Latios pairs really nicely with my first 2 picks here that I've got. Gives me my first defogger. Gives me some especially offensive presence, and a pretty decent Spadef stat actually to boot, and a really nice speed tier to kind of make up for the middling type slowness that I've got with Bulu and Heatran. And it also actually complements Heatran's weaknesses pretty nicely. Not that you necessarily will be wanting to run a more defensive type Latios, but you can get it in on hits that Heatran otherwise wouldn't want to take, specifically ground moves. So if you predicted Earthquake, you can get in your Latios for free and get off a really strong hit with like a Draco or a Psychic or something like that. Another Pokemon that's really nice and versatile, can fulfill a number of team roles. You can even run screens on Latios if you want to, but for the most part, I'll probably be running it like Choice Scarf or Breaker type Latios. You could also run Calm Mind pretty effectively on Latios as well, like a Calm Mind Recover set. Something kind of jank with like Reflect type Calm Mind Recover mono attacking could be kind of neat. But Latios gets some pretty nice coverage options: Thunderbolt, Shadow Ball, Surf. It gets pretty much all the coverage that it would need, bar like a Fire move, and you can still run HP Fire if you need to tech that on. I don't actually think it might not get a fighting move either, so you might have to pick there. But it still gets like Earthquake and stuff too to hit ground weak Pokemon that might want to try and switch in on it. Maybe a poison dark type like Alone Muck or Drapion wouldn't appreciate like an Earthquake from Latios. So another Pokemon I just kind of have been wanting to try out. Again, maybe something that's a little bit better in OU than it is in draft, but in draft it still has a lot of viability, especially with a nice speed tier and the ability to tailor your set to what your opponent's going to be able to bring. You can get away with like Calm Mind Bolt Beam, you can get away with Calm Mind Dual Stab, you can get away with 3 certain attacks, whereas on like a Choice Scarf set, 3 or 4 attacks on a Choice Scarf set that in OU maybe wouldn't be enough coverage in the first place, but can cover you in draft. Stuff like that I think is really nice from Latios. We're running Jetstream as the nickname for Latios because, you know, Latios. But like I was mentioning before I started talking about Latios itself, this was kind of my first mistake of the draft in that both Latios were still on the board, and I didn't really have a preference for which one I got. Like, I was leaning towards Latios, but I wouldn't have minded getting Latias either. Like, I really just wanted kind of the typing, and they don't do the same thing. I don't want to pretend Latios and Latias are exactly the same, but they offer similar utility on the team in terms of defog, Calm Mind setup, sweeper. Latios is a little bit better of a breaker. Latias is a little bit more bulky, but I really would have been fine with either of them on the team. So I should have foregone this and taken Suicune, but I was like, what's going to happen in 3 picks between now and then? And turns out a lot can happen in 3 picks. In the 3 picks after I took Latios, I lost out on opportunities to grab Zapdos, Nihilego, and Suicune. All of which were Pokemon that I definitely had my eye on. Suicune was absolutely going to be my next pick. Nihilego and Zapdos were planned for my next round if they were still kicking around. I really thought Nihilego at least would probably still be kicking around. I thought the Toxic Spikes would pair, like I mentioned, really nicely with the BULUTRAN aspect, BULUTRAN aspect, if I was able to get that far. So I really wanted all 3 of those Pokemon, and they all got drafted in that short interim right before I went up next. So got a little bit sniped there. I had to rework the draft plan kind of significantly, I'll say. But the nice thing about free draft is you're always able to kind of recover because you're not kind of locked into tiers. Like if Suicune, for example, is my planned tier 2, I'm not totally screwed because it got taken, because I can just go find another water type, basically any water type, to replace Suicune. Not that every water type can do what Suicune does. I really, really wanted it on the team, but alas, I made the mistake of drafting Latios instead of taking Suicune first. I probably could have ended up with both of them, or at least like Suicune Latias, if I'd just taken Suicune first. Big mistake on my part. Really unfortunate. For some reason, I didn't think Suicune would be on anybody's radar that early in the draft, unfortunately. So I missed out. But you know, first free draft, stuff happens. I'm still not mad at all about the team that I ended up getting. So. Yeah, we'll move on from there. So, like I mentioned, kind of reworking the draft plan here. With our 4th overall pick, we selected Conkeldurr. Conkeldurr's one of my favorite Pokemon to use in competitive in general. Like, the first Pokemon that I would slap on most of the OU teams I was making was Conkeldurr before all the fairy nonsense with Coco, Lele, Bulu. Ugh. Frickin' fairies all over the place. Clefable. Oh, there's so many fairies now. It's brutal. It's murdered my poor Conkeldurr and shoved him down to BL. But I love Conkeldurr. He's got 3 very, very viable ability options. While you might normally kind of trend towards Guts, so you can eat status for things like Bulu, for things like Latios that don't appreciate Will-O-Wisp and Toxic, things like that. That's nice with Guts being able to come in on those for free with Conkeldurr. But where it really shines is that people are always scared to status a Conkeldurr because they don't want to give it the Guts boost for free. So you can potentially get away with like a cheeky Iron Fist or Life Orb Sheer Forge type set and boost your damage output tremendously. This thing hits incredibly hard. You can see base attack stat of 140 and a really nice HP stat to boot of base 105. Decent physical defense stat, kind of meager SPDEF stat. Obviously, you're not using your special attack, and he's a very slow boy. But he does, of course, have access to Drain Punch, so it really doesn't matter necessarily if he's going second, because your odds are you're not knocking out Conkeldurr, and if he's knocking you out with a Drain Punch in return, he's just getting all his health back anyways. So Conkeldurr, I think, paired pretty nicely still with the team. He does appreciate the grassy terrain leftovers type recovery from Bulu, because if you're running like Flame Orb Conkeldurr with Guts, you're negating the Flame Orb damage. You can still run like leftovers Bulk Up or something like that and get a lot of recovery on your Conkeldurr. Drain Punch plus grassy terrain is really nice to keep your Conkeldurr healthy, things like that. I just thought it paired pretty nicely with the team, and like I mentioned, it's pretty much my favorite mon to use in competitive, even though it might not be the best. I think it's really gonna put in some work this season, so I'm glad to have it on the team. It's the first time I've ever actually drafted Conkeldurr, despite it being my favorite Pokemon to use, but it's gonna put in the hurt on some teams, and I'm excited for it. We're going with Twisty for the name on Conkeldurr, which is named after that creepy-ass clown that was in American Horror Story, the one that blew his mouth off with a shotgun. Yeah, a little bit graphic, sorry. But yeah, we named him Twisty for that clown because that guy is creepy AF. People should be scared of Conkeldurr when he shows up. Next up here, we've got Raikou. Richard Parker the Raikou. So in kind of lieu of getting Suicune, I mean, I was already looking at a couple of pure electric types. I was looking at this, and I was looking at Mega Manectric. I was looking at Zeraora. Zeraora got taken, I think, round 4. Maybe even round 3, so I wasn't able to get that. But I was kind of caught between Raikou and Mega Manectric. I ultimately decided to go with Raikou because I felt like there were some better Mega options out there for me. Oh yeah, that's another rule, by the way. Even though it's free draft, you can only still have 1 Mega Pokemon, so I still have to choose carefully there. Not that I would want to draft more than 1 Mega Pokemon anyways. I don't think that would make a whole lot of sense. Like, oh, they could bring this Mega or that Mega, but you're basically saying I'm guaranteed not bringing one of these 2 Mons, which I don't like in draft. So it's fine that the rule is the way it is. But I ended up going with Raikou over Mega Manectric just because in lieu of getting Suicune, this gives me the option to still run like a Vinku type set. Call it Vinku, Raikou. Because you can still run Sub Protect with Raikou, Sub Toxic Protect if you want, whatever, and still stall out turns, stall out PP with pressure. Its other ability is Inner Focus, which is rarely useful in my opinion. You could run it against like a common fake out user like a Megalopunny, Mega Kangaskhan, whatever, Ambipom. You can run Inner Focus if you don't really feel like you're trying to PP stall anyways. But the mono electric typing is pretty nice on the team because, like I mentioned, Bulu can help cover up that ground weakness because the most common ground coverage that Pokemon are going to get is Earthquake. Not that every Pokemon needs to run Earthquake to get ground coverage, but it's really the best option for the most part is to run Earthquake. And of course, the only weakness that pure electric type would have is ground. So pretty decent pairing there, I think, with Raikou. Gives me another nice kind of speed tier mon on the team. Besides Latios, the team is incredibly slow at this point. So I felt like Raikou fit in pretty well. Also gives me a little bit more of a especially offensive presence as well. So kind of a nice balance here between Bulu, Heatran, Latios, Conkeldurr, and Raikou in terms of offensive stats. I've got a couple of strong physical attackers. I've got a few strong special attackers. I've got some decent utility and Stealth Rock from Heatran, Defog from Latios. I do need a few more Stealth Rockers and Defoggers for sure. I don't like being forced into running Defog or Stealth Rock on any given Pokemon just to bring it. So I'm absolutely going to going forward the draft, looking to grab a couple more of those. But I felt like Raikou was kind of a nice pair here. Start of a Volt Turn core if I want one. I think Volt Turn pairs pretty nicely with like BULUTRAN because they're defenses complement each other so well. You can pick the right one, and they both got like pretty nice natural defensive typings, especially Heatran. So you can Volt Switch out with Raikou into like Tapu Bulu to take a ground move. Things like that are pretty nice for the team. We got Richard Parker for the Tiger from Life of Pi, for those of you who know that book. But pretty nice stats from Raikou as well. Just kind of a nice pair on the team. I felt like the pure ground typing, like I mentioned, was something I really wanted, and I want to be a fast electric type. I said pure ground. Pure electric type was something I wanted, and I wanted to be a fast one like Benedric or Zero or this. So I felt like Raikou was a good pair, and it somewhat made up for not getting Suicune in the first place. I can still run kind of a pressure stall type set with grassy terrain, which I think can still be effective. But of course, Raikou can run some other sets as well. Calm Mind, most notably, as well as like Choice Specs, Choice Scarf, Life Orb, all-out attacker kind of set. Not that Raikou's the greatest, most versatile mon on the planet, but it fulfills its role really nicely, and I think it fits pretty well on the team. And it's still got some pretty nice natural bulk, base 90 HP, base 75 defense is nothing to write home about, but base 100 special defense is actually pretty solid. You can run Assault Vest Raikou as well, and it's got a pretty solid special attack stat to boot. Next up here, we grabbed Mamoswine. So there's a couple of ground types I was looking at. I know it doesn't make the most sense to grab something that relies on Earthquake and pair it with Tapu Bulu, but I felt like the team was gearing a little too specially offensive for my taste. I like to have a nice mix between physical and special offense. And I felt like Mamoswine still paired pretty nicely. I was looking at the Nidos, Nidoqueen, and Nidoking, but Nidoqueen sat in the same speed tier basically as Heatran and Bulu. It actually sits right between them at 76, and then Nidoking's really not that much of an improvement. He's at 85, and if I wanted a T-Spiker, I wanted something to be a little bulkier. I've already used Nidoking in VPL. Not that I dislike Nidoking by any means. I think Nidoking is great in draft format because it's got such great coverage, but I just wanted to try something new, as well as like I didn't feel like Nidoking fit the motif of the team that I was trying to go for, basically. I mean, he kind of does, but he's not quite as bulky as I'd like for the speed tier he's offering me, basically. So while it would have been nice to pair Earth Power with Grassy Terrain, because I wouldn't have to worry about the damage getting reduced, I do like Mamoswine still on the team. It gives me another Stealth Rocking option that I don't think Nidoking, even though it does get Stealth Rocks, would have fulfilled very well. Lead Mamoswine with Stealth Rocks is a pretty solid look. I just don't like running Stealth Rocks on Nidoking because I feel like it more often than not needs the coverage, and that was kind of the same deal with running Toxic Spikes on it as well. Is it more often than not will need the coverage over the hazard that you're setting. So I felt like Mamoswine made a little bit more sense. Generally, you can get away with like ground and ice stab for the most part and be perfectly fine. You'll miss out on a couple things maybe, but I think Mamoswine just overall fit the team a little bit better. The ice typing is going to be really nice to break through kind of bulky grass types that would otherwise bother my Tapu Bulu. Could even potentially bother like Raikou. So it can kind of bust its way through those, while also helping to deal with steel types that, again, Bulu and Latios might not appreciate. So the combination of Conkeldurr plus Mamo I'm kind of counting on to break through those steel types, and Heatran, I guess, to some extent, to help break through those steel types for Tapu Bulu. I think the team's really kind of based around that Pokemon anyways, so I think getting Mamoswine here in the 6th round is a pretty nice deal. And complements the Tapu Bulu pretty nicely. Pretty much everything on the team is just trying to help that Tapu Bulu succeed, trying to help it get in as frequently as possible, and also to do as much damage as possible while having nice kind of safety nets in the back for it, for things that can kind of break through those steel and grass types. So Mamoswine fit the bill. We're running thick for the Hita Fajita Club. I haven't listed Ice as a resist, just because you're not guaranteed to be running Thick Fat, but realistically I don't often see myself running Oblivious or Snow Cloak for the most part. So it'll probably be Thick Fat, and I'll be able to tack on that Ice resist, which is kind of nice for the Tapu Bulu, so I don't have to rely entirely on Heatran to come in and eat Ice type hits. Next up on the team, we got Alolan Muck ourselves. Bringing back Friend of Dave. Didn't feel like changing the nickname from regular Muck because, let's be real, they both love Dave. Alolan Muck, Friend of Dave here. Gluttony, Poison Touch, Power of Alchemy for abilities. Nobody's going to use Power of Alchemy in singles, so Gluttony or Poison Touch are both very viable abilities. Again, mono weak to ground Pokemon, so I've got a little bit of a ground weakness running, but it's covered up a little bit by the fact that I have Bulu. And it's got some pretty decent resistances for its typing, but it's really the natural bulk that we're after here. It's got great natural special bulk. You can slap an Assault Vest on it. If you're running a Gluttony set, you can run the 50% berries and not care. Run like Recycle plus the 50% berry. It's actually really hard to kill Muck in general. This obviously being the better of the two mucks, and I can't imagine anybody's opinion that muck is better than Alolan muck. I think Alolan muck is just a straight upgrade. Better natural typing, better move pool. That's pretty much what we were after here with Alolan muck. I think it fits the team pretty nicely. It gives me another viable especially bulky switch in. Another Pokemon that really appreciates grassy terrain recovery, if not, of course, the ground weakening effect of grassy terrain. So I think it fit on the team pretty nicely. It helps to trap psychic types with Pursuit for my Latios and my Conkeldurr. So it pairs pretty nicely there, and of course the Dark type giving me a Psychic immunity for my Conkeldurr. That way I don't have to be relying entirely on Heatran to switch in on Psychic type hits. Well, Heatran and Latios, I guess. To switch in on Psychic type hits, I can bring in a Alolan muck instead. So I think just kind of it fits the team pretty nicely in terms of defensive synergy, but also in terms of utility. Poison Touch is really nice to spread chip around my opponent's team in lieu of grabbing a Toxic Spiker. Spoilers, I don't end up grabbing a Toxic Spiker. The Poison Touch ability for Alolan muck is going to be really nice to help chip down my opponent's teams while I'm benefiting from the grassy terrain recovery. So Poison Touch, Poison Jab, I believe, has a 51% chance to poison, if I'm not mistaken, which is, in my eyes, pretty damn good. So it's hacks to not get it, basically. So even if Alolan muck gets burnt or something like that, it's still useful because it can potentially spread status around your opponent's team. It can remove items with knockoff. It has really actually quite nice coverage. It gets Fire Punch, gets Ice Punch, gets Giga Drain if you're feeling cheeky for something like a Swampert. Really nice coverage options from Alolan muck. And you'll notice this team actually is running very bulky offense right now in terms of motif. Like, all of these Pokemon have one or more attacking stats above 100. Well, one attacking stat above 100, but also have incredibly nice HP stats. I think the lowest one is Latios at 80, base 80 HP, with pretty decent natural bulk, and the option, of course, to recover or roost. So I think the team is fitting that kind of bulky offense type niche that I really like to play in, and that's kind of what the goal was coming into the draft, even if I didn't get everything exactly as I wanted it. Continuing the trend of Mons with greater than 100 base attack stats, we've got Mega Aerodactyl Shuriken, named after the dragon from the Aragon series, or the Inheritance Cycle, whatever you want to call it. If you guys are familiar with those books, if not, you should definitely check them out. Highly recommend those books, but named after the dragon, or one of the dragons from that book. Mega Aerodactyl is a Pokemon I've been wanting to use for a little bit, because looking at like a standard tier league, it's usually like a tier 2 Mega, which I think is, not that it should be a tier 1 Mega, but it's usually one of the better value tier 2 Megas in my opinion. It's got obviously a blistering fast speed stat at base 150, paired with a really nice physically offensive stat at base 135, plus Tough Claws boost on things like Wing Attack, things like Fire Fang get boosted, Ice Fang. Gets really nice coverage options. Also has access to Pursuit to potentially trap Psychic types from my Conkeldurr or my Latios. So I felt like it paired pretty nicely on the team. Gives me another Stealth Rocking option on the team, so that's the third one. And also another Defogging option on the team. So I felt like the utility fit in pretty well there. I was looking at two Megas here. I was looking at Aerodactyl, and I was also looking at Mega Pidgeot. Felt like both paired pretty nicely with the team. The Flying type is really very much appreciated by things like Tapu Bulu for breaking through grass types. But ultimately I ended up going with Aerodactyl because I felt like there were better normal types still on the board than there were rock types for the most part. And a kind of nice physically offensive rock like Mega Aerodactyl is really, really difficult to come by because regular Aerodactyl just doesn't hold a candle, in my opinion. And it's actually got some also kind of like decent natural bulk. It's nothing crazy, like 80, 85, 95 is nothing crazy. But you pair it with Roost, you pair it with the fact that your speed tier is so high, you can usually get away with running a little bit more bulk on your Mega Aerodactyl. Like, the only thing speed tying with you in the format is Mega Alakazam. And only one person gets Mega Alakazam, so it's going to force Choice Scarf users, which my team appreciates. It's going to force people to prep for it really hard, I think, in general, even when it doesn't show. Just because you have to have some kind of speed control option in place so that you don't just get outsped and swept by Mega Aerodactyl. Not that it's going to be OHKOing every mon on your opponent's team, but it's definitely a Pokemon you can set up like a late game clean for, like a Home Claws type set. You can even just run like all-out attacker type sets and just wear down your opponent's team and then come in and clean with Mega Aerodactyl. Very viable strategy in my opinion, and of course had those couple of nice utility options that I mentioned. I did mention also that it does lock some Pokemon into Choice Scarfs, which my team does appreciate just because of the nice defensive synergy that I've got going. If something's locked into like a Choice Scarf electric move, I've got plenty of answers for that, and things like Bulu, things like Latios, Raikou, Mamoswine can all take advantage of things choice locked into electric moves. Ice moves, kind of the same deal. Heatran appreciates eating those ice moves up. Rock moves, I can go into my out into my Conkeldurr. Steel moves, Heatran can eat up. Like, you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Basically, it's just kind of nice on the team to force that kind of speed control, and then I can compensate by going out into Pokemon, other Pokemon on my team. It can also eat, like, I've also got Pokemon that can eat Prankster status moves, like Prankster Thunder Wave. I can eat with my Conkeldurr and get a Guts boost. I can eat it with Raikou and be immune to it. Alolan Muck is immune to Prankster moves because of its Dark typing, so just kind of, I felt like the usual hindrances to Mega Aerodactyl were pretty well covered by my team in terms of status absorbers and Pokemon that appreciate the damage reduction that running a Choice Scarf is associated with. They don't get the extra damage output from like a Life Orb. They can't break like a Bulu, for example. So I felt like that was kind of important in terms of the network of the team, and it also is helping to flesh out my speed tiers a little bit more. Like I mentioned, the team overall is still a little bit slow, bar Raikou, Latios, and Aerodactyl, but I'm starting to kind of build out the rest of my speed tiers here, and I'll help to compensate, of course, with my last 3 picks. Next up here, like I mentioned, trying to compensate for my speed tiers, we got Ribombee here, getting the name Grace because Grace always gets 1. I love you, Grace. So we got Ribombee here, filling out Bug Fairy typing. So I already had a Fairy in Bulu, but like I mentioned, Bulu's not a very good Fairy, so I felt like Ribombee was kind of a nice pairing there because it actually gets Stab Fairy move. Ho, what a wonder that you would actually get a Stab Fairy move that's useful. So obviously Ribombee has access to Moonblast, has access to Quiver Dance. It can be a potent setup sweeper. Even just Bug Buzz Moonblast is pretty decent coverage for things that aren't Steel types, which I think my team otherwise can deal with pretty nicely. Things like Conkeldurr, Heatran, Mamoswine can help me deal with opposing Steel types pretty nicely, or they can at the very least get worn down by things like Bulu and Aerodactyl and Latios over the course of the match, allowing Ribombee to potentially sweep late game. But it also has a very important access to Sticky Webs now. So Sticky Webs are very nice for the team. Things like Bulu, things like Heatran, Mamoswine. Not that Sticky Webs are going to help Conkeldurr and Muck out very much, but I guess they do a little bit. So Sticky Webs being very nice to pair with a few of those Pokemon, compensate for their kind of less than exemplary speed tiers by reducing my opponent's speed, and it also starts to force my opponent to think about defogging before me, which is something I always like to have on my draft league teams, is a reason for my opponent to defog when I don't care enough. Like, even if I have a Pokemon or two that's weak to Stealth Rocks, if I've got Sticky Webs up, generally my opponent's going to be the one who's more pressured to defog than I am, just because things like Mamoswine running around with webs up are not a good look for my opponent. Like Life Orb Mamoswine plus Sticky Webs, that can hurt real bad as a potential option there. And of course things like Tapu Bulu also appreciate, and Heatran also appreciate the Sticky Webs because they can run more offensive sets that otherwise would be kind of problematic because they get outsped by something like a base 100 type Pokemon that would threaten them. If I get the Sticky Webs up, now I outspeed them and I can hit them really hard. Heatran's got a really nice special attack stat. Blue's got a really nice physical attack stat, buffed even further by Grassy Terrain on his grass type moves. So I think Sticky Webs just paired really nicely with the team. I think I originally wasn't planning to draft Sticky Webs, like going into the BULUTRAN, Latios, Suicune mindset that I was in. I wasn't thinking Sticky Webs, I was thinking more like T-Spikes, but as the team started to take shape, I started to realize, okay, Sticky Webs I think pairs really nicely on this team, and Ribombee kind of fit the bill there as a nice offensive fairy type. I didn't really want like a Slurpuff. I felt like Slurpuff didn't really do much for the team. It started to kind of compound the speed tier issues, and I feel like Ribombee's a more reliable Sticky Webber. You can run like Focus Sash Lead Ribombee, and it's pretty hard to stop it from getting up Sticky Webs because it has such a great natural speed tier, and you can't run like Fake Out on Ribombee because it has Shield Dust, which is really the only ability you would ever run on Ribombee. I think Honey Gather actually has no competitive use, and Sweet Veil might do something in doubles. I don't actually know. But Ribombee, again, fitting pretty nicely on the team, mostly for the Sticky Web utility. Also an option to defog if I want, and a potential like Quiver Dance setup type sweeper. Next up here, we're starting to round out the draft here. Got my normal type with Staraptor named Yikes. Yikes is kind of a meme in the Villanova Gaming Society, so shout out to you guys. I've got Yikes the Staraptor here. Going for a little bit of bird spam here with the double flying type with Aerodactyl and Staraptor. Felt like getting a Staraptor this late in the draft was kind of a steal because it's a great offensive Pokemon. Obviously has 2 really nice abilities in Intimidate and Reckless. You can run like a bulkier Defog type Roost set with Intimidate, Rocky Helmet, stuff like that. Or you can run just straight offensive, run Choice Scarf, Choice Band with Reckless and hit really hard with Double Edge and Brave Bird. And it also gets basically the perfect coverage component with that in close combat. So you really, most variants of offensive Staraptor don't need to run more than Double Edge, Brave Bird, close combat, and U-turn. Like, you could pretty much get away with that as a Staraptor. And it also appreciates the sticky web support from Bombilla. Base 100 is not slow by any means, but it's going to get outsped by a lot of stuff that'll otherwise threaten it because its natural bulk isn't so great. But if you get sticky webs up and you're running like Banded Staraptor, yikes. Banded Staraptor hits like a truck, so if we can run that this season, that would be pretty dope. But Staraptor, I felt like just paired really nicely on the team, giving me a little bit more of an offensive presence and completing a small Volt Turn core with my Raikou. Really, again, just kind of looking to help Bulu shine, like trying to get Bulu in as frequently as possible and trying to break through at things that would otherwise wall it, like grass types and steel types. Staraptor does a great job at weakening those, so I felt like it was kind of a nice pairing on the team, and it gave me that normal type that I've been looking for, and yet again, another ground immunity, so protecting things like my Raikou, Heatran, and Muck. I've got 2 flying types now, right? Bombilla resists ground, I've got Bulu resists ground, plus sets up grassy terrain, Latios has levitate, so I'm basically trying to cover up the ground weakness that I've created for myself in the context of having a Bulu-based team. So I felt like Staraptor fits pretty nicely to fit the bill there, and also kind of help round up my speed tiers and could be a really nice physically offensive threat. And the last Pokemon on the team, something that's probably not so flashy of a pick in a free draft format, is Jellicent. Jellicent for Old No Name from SpongeBob, the one jellyfish that SpongeBob was never able to catch. We got No Name, the Jellicent. 2 good abilities, I'll say, in Curse Body and Water Absorb. Water Absorb generally the preferred ability, but in the case where I'm not like so threatened by my opponent's water type, I can just run Cursed Body and potentially get that 30% disable, which is actually way more valuable than I think people realize. Just the ability to get Cursed Body disabled, especially on a Pokemon with access to recovery like Jellicent does have access to recover. And also a really nice natural Spadef stat, base 105, paired with a really nice 100 HP stat. Nothing too flashy in terms of what it can do. Like, offensively, it's basically not offering you too much. You can run like a Will-O-Wisp Hex set, which is pretty cute. It does have Scald to spread status around your opponent's team. But otherwise, its offensive coverage options are, I think, kind of lacking, which is fair to say, but also not so much of a problem for my team. I've got plenty of offense on this team. Like I mentioned, I think everything but Bombilla to this point has an attacking stat over base 100. So I really don't need Jellicent to be coming in and whacking stuff when it comes in. I need it to be coming in, sponging hits, and using some of its great utility access to help out the rest of the team. It can spread status around with Will-O-Wisp. It can use Trick to cripple opposing bulk, like if I run Choice Specs Jellicent or something, not necessarily to run Choice Specs Jellicent, but to trick it onto an opposing wall. Something like a Mantine, for example, would be an obvious switch into a Jellicent, or a Chansey, or anything like that would be an obvious switch into a Jellicent. You can trick the Choice Specs onto them and render them almost useless, and generally steal like a leftovers type thing back, which is nice for the Jellicent. It also has the option to Trick Room, so another kind of anti-speed control option for the team. So things like Conkeldurr, Muck, even Bulu, Heatran are not so fast. But if I run Trick Room on Jellicent, I can get those things in to do some real big damage to my opponent. Specifically like Conkeldurr, I think pairs really nicely with Trick Room, because that thing has amazing coverage, so it's difficult to switch into, and it helps to alleviate some of the guessing game with like, do I Ice Punch, do I Thunder Punch? Well, if I'm faster the next turn anyways, it might not matter as much. Obviously, Trick Room in singles is a little bit more difficult because you're wasting the turn to set it up, and then you gotta switch out into the Pokemon that you want to use it. But I feel like my team has the natural bulk to accommodate a potential Trick Room user. I felt like Jellicent kind of fulfilled that role pretty nicely, as well as rounding out my typings. As you might have noticed, Water and Ghost were the only typings that I needed left on the team. I've been eyeing Jellicent for quite some time at this point in the draft, and I figured it wasn't going to get sniped because, like I mentioned, it's not such a sexy free draft type pick, but it offers some pretty nice resistances to the team. Things like Fire, Steel, Fighting are all very like important resistances / immunities to have on this team. Even normal resists are difficult to come by for the most part. So I felt like Jellicent paired pretty nicely there in terms of that, and like I mentioned, had some pretty nice utility options to help the team out. So that's it for the team, guys. Thank you very much for watching to this point. If you did, I hope you guys are excited to see some MWPA content. I'm really excited to play in a new league. Not that I dislike my old leagues at all. I'll be continuing those as they come with the ABC and the VPL. But I think kind of getting my name out there and getting some more exposure to people who are good at draft league format. I know there's a lot of really good players in this league. And I'd like to have some more experience in the format playing them, as well as continuing in my other leagues. So the more draft league I can get, the better at this point. Not that I want to overload myself. This is, like I mentioned, my 3rd league, 4th if you count Whale Lord. I don't know if that's coming back yet, the tier 3 and below league that I participated in but didn't end up uploading. So basically just getting more exposure to draft league is always good. I can kind of manage my time commitments as I go forward. This is only an 8-week season, I believe, with 2-week playoffs if I get that far. So it's not such a huge time commitment, especially with ABC being currently on break and VPL winding down. We're in the semifinals match versus John coming up soon. And then even if I get past John, it's still only one more game with the championship. So I felt like I was able to accommodate an extra league here going forward. And I think this was kind of a good one for me to get in because, like I mentioned, there's some very good players here. And with the promotion relegation system, I'm starting out in Earth, so I've got a lot of upward movement potential here if I do well. And I'd like to see how far I can go, basically. Like to see where I'm at in the draft league community in terms of skill level, and definitely looking forward to competing against some new really good players. So thank you guys for watching again if you did to this point. No, it's kind of a long video as the draft recaps usually are, but thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.